Clerk Spencer, you ready?
Thank you, sir.
It is, can't see that,
9:07, Your Honor.
9:07 on Monday, September 16th, 2003. We're here for the Committee of the Whole. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Clerk Spencer, would you please call the roll?
Gutenkopf. Here. Deuter.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Leader.
Here.
Polumsky.
Here.
Graham.
Here.
Hipskin.
Here.
York.
Here.
Levin.
Here.
Healy.
Here.
Conquest.
Here.
Kennedy.
Here.
Mulliner.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
14 present, 0 absent.
14 present, 0 absent. We certainly have a quorum. On to agenda item number 2, public comments. We're going to treat public comments same way we do with our normal council meetings. You have 3 minutes. Anybody from the audience has the opportunity to speak. You can speak on any topic you like. Don't necessarily expect an answer, but if certainly we cover it, that's great. We ask that you keep your, out of respect for time and us getting our meeting hopefully completed before the end of the day, we ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. If you get to 3 minutes, we will give you a little prompt to let you know you're getting to the end. And Clerk Spencer, do we have anybody who has signed up this evening?
Yes, we have several bodies.
Can you give me a count before we get started?
I show 11 that have signed in tonight, and I'm going to start with Deanne Mazzocchi. Did I say that right?
Sure, you did actually. Deanne Mazzocchi, 156 South Sunnyside. I just wanted to say that I am in favor of continuing with the development of the site sooner rather than later. And furthermore, I would be in favor of the higher parking garage height because I don't think anyone has ever traveled to downtown Elmhurst and bemoaned the fact that there are too many parking options. Thank you.
Okay. John Dulles, 128 North Addison.
Good evening. I'm John Dulles. I have Dulles Cleaners across the street from the proposed parking deck garage. I'm very curious to hear the resurrection. I thought we had killed this parking garage. I was at the meetings, the zoning meetings, when they said the parking garage, the zoning committee said that the property was too small for a 6-story building or a 4-story building on that property. And now I see it's resurrected again, and I see that our former mayor is all excited about it. He says, "Oh, the chamber wants it, and the city center wants it." Well, who controls the city center and the chamber? Mr. Willis Johnson. Who has appointed the president of City Center, Tom Paravola? Willis Johnson. Who owns properties around there that wants a parking garage built with our tax dollars? Willis Johnson. Who else is buying properties around this town? Lee Daniels. Why do they want to get a 6-story building built by our taxpayers? So they can get an anchor. Once they get that building built, 6 stories, they can develop their own properties and change the zoning from 4 stories to 6 stories. I think the collusion here is very evident here. The powers that be that control our city and city center, the very wealthy in this town, are pressuring to build that parking garage. They don't care about the parking garage. They want to get the zoning because they own parcels of land downtown Elmhurst, and they want to get the zoning from 4 stories that it's been to 6 stories. The powers that be that want to make money and use the council here and use our tax dollars to build it so they can make money off of us. I've been a resident of Elmhurst here for 50 years. My father has a business here. I'm second generation for 53 years. I'm right across the street from that part. I watched that property being bought illegally, and we had to sue the city to open the meetings up in here. This property, this deal has been a corrupt deal since day one. And you're trying to now to resurrect it again and build this building, this 6-story parking deck, maybe $12 to $15 million more, plus the $5 million that we have invested in the property already. So you're talking close to $20 million property on the taxpayers' back here, so you can enrich certain powers that be in this city. to enrich them and change the zoning. This is corruption on a major level here, and I don't see the alderman here tonight saying a peep about it. They're falling in line with our mayor, our new mayor, our ex-mayor, and the powers that be here. This is corruption on the major levels. I told you guys before, you guys are turning into a little Chicago here. My fellow taxpayers, don't let them do it. You're the bosses here tonight. You're the bosses. We pay the freight here in this town, not them. They work for us, but I guess eventually they lost their purpose in what they're doing. They're supposed to be serving the public, not us serving them. So
Dulles, if you
be
could
very
wrap up,
careful.
we're at 3 minutes.
Be very careful, Mr. Mayor and council. Be very careful, because the power that be is these people right here, not you.
I have Tracy Breen, 156 Walnut, but didn't she have to go home to pay the babysitter?
I think that,
Did she come back? Okay,
I think that's the one.
okay, all right. We'll go to Claude Pagash, 566 West Gladys.
Claude Pocket, 566 West Gladys. I was going to be cool, calm, and quiet this evening, but I guess I've been won over. I really have. Didn't want the garage. Didn't want the garage with an office. But you've won me over. You even brought in an ex-alderman. So let's just get to the chase. See, 11 wants 6 stories. Morley doesn't want to add to a 4-story. So let's just solve the whole problem. You are all individuals of great vision. So what we're going to do is this. We're going to build a 20 to 30-story garage. We're going to totally enclose it. We're going to heat it and air condition it. We're going to use freight elevators to move cars. We're going to have it lime green, at least yellow. On top of it, we're going to put a restaurant. It's going to be the top of the parking garage. And that's going to eliminate zoning and planning. You won't have to worry about adding to the garage. You'll always have it. It'll be a site. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, you are people of vision. Eiffel was laughed at, condemned. Millions go to see the Eiffel Tower. Pisa, they built a clock tower. It leaned. They spent millions to keep that clock tower on leaning. We go to the Parthenon, a pile of rocks. People run there, take trips. You're going to have something that's going to bring people to this town. You won't have to worry about zoning. And last of not, just think, who would have thought if you piled rocks in the middle of the desert and put a lion statue out there with a human face, that millions would come to see it? So don't hesitate. Listen to all these people. Build a 30-story, don't stop. Why? It started out as a 4-story parking garage. You guys don't want it. The business community don't want it. So give them what they want. And damn the people.
Mike Baker, 432 East Park.
Mike Baker, 432 East Park. Tonight's discussions on Addison Street and later on Hahn Street are extremely important to the future of the city of Elmhurst landscape. I hope the council understands the scope of their decisions on these projects and how this could affect the livelihood in Elmhurst the next generations. There seems to be a hurry-up posture developing on the Addison Street project. In fact, unlike the developers who gave presentation on Hahn Street, some of our city staff prepared the current proposals we're looking at to move the project forward, while the developer has been largely quiet since mid-July. Most recently, the Zoning Commission not only turned down a request to place a 6-story building on Addison, but the committee requested the city give them better direction as to what the vision of the city is. They implored and asked for a direction and a vision from the City Council. I'm sure a four-story parking structure, if approved, would be based on an established set of criteria as it sits within the city's vision for the downtown central district. Additionally, not only have we not started building the structure, but we're talking about developing the donut hole, changing traffic patterns on Addison Street, and including a bike path on Addison Street. Under the plan, there will be 3 different places that pedestrians and traffic will intersect. That's a dangerous situation, and that's more exits and entryways than any parking garage the city currently has. Elmhurst wants a vibrant and desirable downtown. We often compare ourselves to our neighboring towns. The public is looking to each of you to lead our city forward as to how to improve our downtown. We need a better partnership between the developer, between the city council, and the public needs to be brought in further. Then while the building is taking place, explore every opportunity we have to bring business here to fill the parking spots with customers in the new structure. If it means we take a step back, as one of the aldermen suggested at the last meeting, then perhaps we need to do so. We should get this project moving with 4 stories as originally planned instead of 6. Council felt that way, and many of you were on that council when that project was inked with the developer. The garage should not be looked at as a pillar of downtown. We need these same people and others who have spoken to you repeatedly to be economic driving forces to build a downtown that is vibrant and desirable. Anything bigger will take the attention from where it should be on helping our local businesses grow and those people that work hard every day to bring those people downtown. Additionally, on Hahn Street, I appreciated the opportunity to look at the proposals on Hahn Street. There was a uniqueness and niche. It's hard to not be excited when you see the opportunities a gateway to Elmhurst can be. My immediate concern is the timing the council is using to score the developers and narrow down the search. Alderman Gudenkauf spoke of having a bit more time to interact with constituents and possibly the developers for more information or to answer questions. 3 aldermen weren't at the second set of proposals last week, so they were unable to ask direct questions of the developers. That would seem like a failed opportunity. Perhaps some feedback or discussion will occur this evening, which leads to more questions on behalf of for the developers.
Mr. Baker, you're at about 3.5 minutes. If you could wrap it up, that'd be great.
I will be very brief. I think it's the council's responsibility to make sure they have as much information as possible. The developers have spent hours and hours of time and researched their presentation. If something gets overlooked in the haste to narrow down the field and we don't have a true partnership, then the city and the residents will be the real losers in this development. Thank you.
John Kirshner, 245 Villa.
John Kirchner, 245 Villa. A couple of thoughts on Hahn Street project. I'm hoping that the City Council carefully considers these fine companies' past performances and choose the company that we have the most confidence in building, leasing, and managing. Please put more emphasis on choosing the right company over the right design. We can always modify the design later. Secondly, I'm really hoping that the city receives a fair cash payment from the developer for the land. The last time I checked, which was a year ago, the total cost in connection with the Hahn Street project was over $7 million. While it is reasonable to give developers incentives, it is unreasonable to give it away for free, especially when there are offers on the table to pay for the land. That's it.
Steve Della Rosa, Citizens Advocacy Center, 182 North York.
Thank you for the time. Steve Della Rosa, 182 North York Road, Citizens Advocacy Center. I'm a longtime board member of the Citizens Advocacy Center. Our new executive director, Miriam Judah, is not able to be here tonight because she is hosting CAC's Constitution Week speaker with the program that has been collaborating with York High School for the past 4 years. As many of you know, CAC has been active in working and voicing concerns about this project from its inception in 2009, challenging the City Council to act in a manner that is transparent and responsive to the community. Knowing that the Addison Street project is on the agenda for discussion tonight, we feel it is important to make a public comment. 1. Citizens Advocacy Center's community lawyers emailed the City Council on August 27th. We asked the Council to A, heed the advice of the Zoning and Planning Commission, which was to do some planning for the area prior to moving forward with any project, and B, make that planning process meaningful, meaning not a sham process where only selective individuals participate, but rather to involve a healthy composition of the community stakeholders. If the city is at a loss as to where to start to find the healthy composition of stakeholders, inviting those who took the time to speak out against the first proposal at the Zoning and Planning Commission public hearing would be a good place to start. A second point. So as I understand it, the city has committed itself to build a parking garage. Since scrapping the project is unlikely, since there is a contract, we are asking the city to stick to the original contract, a 4-story structure. Lastly, the Citizens Advocacy Center has asked what the existing planning process for development in this area has been. Our community lawyers have asked at the Zoning and Planning Commission hearing and again on our August 27th email from 2013. We have done this based on information found in the Freedom of Information Act request to the city, which was referred to in our August 27th communication to the city. No response has been provided for this thus far. And I would think the question of what kind of previous planning or contemplation for the area is a pretty basic item for discussion. I want to thank you for the time this evening. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Tamara Brenner, 137 North Caroline.
Tamara Brenner, 137 North Caroline. Well, this week I submitted a 5-page write-up of various issues having to do with the Addison project to everybody on the council. I don't know if anybody read it or not. Believe it or not, there was more. I cut it back by 2 or 3 pages because there's a lot of things on this project that you all should be considering. But without getting to the other things that I would like to say about it, I am also highly concerned to know that there are a number of neighbors of mine that I understand have submitted letters to the city about the project in writing with a request that those be read into the record. And it was my understanding first thing this morning that that was going to happen because I called a couple aldermen to verify that that was the case, and I was told it was. Sometime during the day, apparently that opinion changed, and the city has decided they don't need to read those letters into the record, which means that myself and everybody watching here, people who might watch the video of this meeting, won't know how many people spoke up about this project and what they had to say. Were they in support of 6 or 4? What did they say? We are not allowed to know this. This goes back again to the ability of the public to participate in a project that they are paying for, and it speaks to the fact that the city seems to go back to what it is legal for it to do, which is they don't have to read these letters. That's legally true, but there's nothing stopping them from reading them. They could read them if they wanted to, and I think it's a show of the leadership that we're seeing in the city, the fact that those letters aren't going to be read. At the very least, what you guys could do is give a summary, the names, and whether they supported or opposed 4 or 6 stories so that people would know what level of support was out there in the community. This should be done now when the city council is making decisions, not after the fact again. I do want to address a couple things about the building, which is that I'm getting the idea that no matter what, people, in some group of people, want this to be a 6-story building no matter what. This started in 2009 when the first contract was approved. There was a provision in there that wanted it to be 6 stories that ended up getting struck during the council discussions. The previous alderman who spoke here was part of that council and was in favor of the contract back then and argued for the 6 stories back then, if I recall from watching those meetings. Then the first appearance of 6 stories in public was December 2010 when the developer came and said, hey, let's put the office piece in there. This next spring, 2011, there was an attempt to put a text amendment in the zoning code that would have allowed 6 stories without a conditional use throughout the downtown. Then we had the 6-story office component application failed, and lo and behold, 2 weeks ago we hear, okay, let's just do 6 stories anyway, all parking. It's a totally different project than what it was before, so it seems like there's this idea that this has to be a 6-story building, it doesn't matter what goes in it. Why is this? There's no discernible reason, at least none that I know of from what's available publicly. If there's a bit of private information that's informing council's thoughts, can you please disclose that? We deserve to know. The taxpayers are paying for this. If there are specific development projects in mind, please publicize them. It's the city's responsibility to provide adequate public parking. That's what they've agreed to do for the downtown, but it's not the city's job to accede to arbitrary and unjustified demands to build more parking than is necessary. Now, I also want to address this concern about some aldermen and previous aldermen that mistakes were made in the past and too little parking was built on prior parking structures such that 9 years later or 12 years later additional stories were added. That's what happened with Schiller and Adelaide. In an effort to head off this charge of having built too little parking, the response is to overbuild this deck now, which to me is just as bad of a response.
Ms. Brenner, you're over 3 minutes. If you could wrap it up,
I'll
that'd be
wrap it
great.
up. There's no justification for building overbuilding to 6 stories compared to 5, 7, 8, or 23 stories. So therefore, build to the maximum height allowed by the zoning code and call it a day. Get this project moving rather than going through a whole another process of arguing about the 6 stories. 4 stories will be more than enough parking. Thanks.
Katie Munoz, 134 North Larch Avenue.
My name is Katie Munoz. I live at 134 North Larch Avenue. I've been an Elmhurst resident for 12 years now. I live in downtown Elmhurst, 1 block west of the proposed 6-story garage. I am beyond disappointed in the city council members who continue to push this project in the face of rational opposition. Last Friday, my husband and I were downtown restaurant for dinner, and we decided to walk down home via Addison Street. We were looking at the proposed site when we looked across the street at the little parking strip right there between the hairdresser and Rouse and saw nobody parked there, empty, maybe a handful of cars. Looking at this beautiful Friday evening got me to thinking about why anyone would think we need a garage so large. And it occurred to me that Elmhurst residents have never been given an adequate outline of the need for this type of structure. But I can give you plenty of reasons why we don't need it. First, a large number of our own Elmhurst merchants don't even see the need for it or think that it will benefit the development of downtown. Taxpayers don't want or need the additional burden. We may be in some kind of recovery, but that's not everybody, and that tax dollar or that bill every month is going to hit people, and it's going to matter to them. Surrounding neighborhoods don't want the blight. It's not part of the comprehensive plan. Our own codes don't support it, and our own zoning and planning commission rejected it. We have evolved into an evidence-based society. People want to see proof that spending tax dollars on even a 4-story garage directly correlates with increased revenue for businesses and an increased tax base, thereby reducing the financial burden on residents. In this case, neither the city nor the developer has ever provided this type of evidence. Instead, it seems that the thinking is more along the lines of, if we build it, they will come, followed closely by, plus we already signed the deal, so we got to do it. That's not enough. In the last 4 months, we've watched several shops and/or restaurants close. I'm referring to Jean Bijou's, Topiary, which, why didn't anyone buy flowers there? They were awesome. The Standard, La La Land, to name a few. In addition, we have more than our share of empty office space. We seem to think we have a problem with parking, but we have an even bigger problem with understanding what our community wants and needs that will keep people coming into downtown Elmhurst to spend their dollars. Building this garage reminds me of Apple's iPhone fix. Throw color at it. Throw color at it. Only in Elmhurst, we don't throw color, we throw big garages at it. It would be great if the city would just slow down, just a bit. Why not develop the current space into a street-level open parking deck and determine the actual usage of that parking? And in the meantime, the comprehensive plan could be reviewed, and a full study could be completed to determine what types of businesses will bring people in versus just filling space with a succession of businesses that don't succeed. We're also a green community, or we keep saying that we are, and we should be using what we have, not creating more wasted space.
Excuse me, ma'am, you're over 3 minutes. If you could wrap it up, that'd be great.
Why not figure out how to fill the vacant office spaces before we create more? In response to former Alderman Regan, there's more than one way to say yes. There has to be a better way than maxing out land and space and creating more space that might not even benefit the community, and it's up to the City Council to find that better way.
Susan Semtek, 196 North Larch.
Good evening. My name is Susan Smentek, 196 North Larch. I'm opposed to allowing a 65-foot, 6-story structure on the Addison Street site. A building of that size is completely out of character for the neighborhood, and the 45-foot, 4-story building that's already allowed will dwarf the surrounding buildings as it is. Plus 4 stories is a lot more parking than we have now. 6 stories is too much, and it damages the residential neighborhood that Katie and I live in, west of Addison. I encourage you to say no to spending extra taxpayer funds on the additional floors. Regarding the Hahn Street development proposals, I'm interested in the proposal from the Banner Apartments, the Elmhurst Green Team, because their proposal includes pedestrian walkways, rainwater management, and a public playground that promotes active living and creates a park in a neighborhood that currently does not have one. On my way out the door to come here this evening, one of my neighbors handed me a note that hasn't already been emailed to you, so I said I would read it for her. Her name is Dolores Gonina, and she lives at 245 North Larch. Dear Mayor Morley and City Council members, my husband and I moved to Elmhurst 27 years ago because it was a friendly and charming town with vibrant, family-oriented businesses that we frequented. While businesses have changed over the years, the town's curb appeal has remained intact. Unfortunately, adding a 6-story, 65-foot building on Addison Street will only detract from the city's charm and head us down the path of towns such as Park Ridge and Arlington Heights, allowing bigger buildings with loss of beauty and character. A short time ago, 3 members of my family voted for mayor and council members that we thought would uphold the charm of this town while supporting and attracting desirable Elmhurst businesses. Please respect the downtown plan and keep us a vibrant and charming town. I respectfully request that my letter be read during the public forum portion of the Committee of the Whole meeting on September 16, 2003. Sincerely, Dolores Sconina. Thank you.
The last person I have that signed in is Sharon Giese, 200 Larch. Is it?
Thank you. You got it right. I'm impressed.
I am too. Thank you.
Without having the answers to these questions, I do not support the proposals including 6 stories on Addison Street. Buildings of that height would tower over the nearby one and 2-story existing structures and are not in character with the surrounding community. Why were approximately 450 parking spots sufficient during the last proposal, yet now we need about 300 to 400 more? What studies have been completed to support needing 718 to 845 parking spots and a 6-story parking deck in that one location? In comparison, the existing Larch Avenue and Adelaide Street garages both have approximately 250 parking spots. Can Addison Avenue and the nearby residential streets handle the flow of 718 to 854 cars with only one entrance and one exit? How will the traffic patterns change with the proposed 300 to 400 parking spaces for residential, retail, and the public being created 2 blocks away for the Hahn Street project? Can Addison and the nearby streets handle the movement of cars using these proposed 1,000 plus parking spaces? And I'm sorry, I'm basing these numbers on what I could find on the Elmhurst City website. So I respectfully ask that my questions are considered when you're making your decisions.
That's it, Mr. Mayor, as far as those that signed in. Now, I think there's some people
I know there's some others. Can I just get a show of hands real quick to see? 1, 2, 3, looks like at least 3. Okay, and so you didn't have an opportunity to sign in. We certainly want to hear your comments. And the lady in the back who was waiting patiently since the last meeting, please approach the microphone, identify yourself and your address, and you have 3 minutes after you do so.
Diana Pagach, 566 West Gladys Avenue. All right. The question is, does the council represent the residents or the wealthy businessmen? What if the residents had come to the city council and said they wanted a parking garage? Would the city have gone out and spent $5.5 million to acquire the land to build the garage? I think not. So far, the original idea was a 4-story parking garage for the citizens of Elmhurst to park. No thought of offices or 6 stories. It was presented to the Building and Zoning as a 6-story garage with offices. There were only residents at this meeting who were against the 6-story, and one businessman who was for the 6 stories. The plan was rejected by the Building and Zoning. Now the council is debating what the residents want, a 6-story garage or a 4-story garage. Now the businessmen who failed to participate at the Planning and Zoning meeting want 6 stories at the taxpayers' expense. Now, who does the city actually represent? That is the question. I also have petitions here from the residents against the 6 stories.
Would you like to hand those in now?
Sure.
Certainly. Please present them to Clerk Spencer. And right here.
Over here, Diana.
We're just getting started.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to speak? I know I saw at least one more hand. Yes, sir, go ahead.
My name's Keith Monken. I live at 240 North Addison. The 2 projects really affect me, and what we've heard tonight is really one of passion for our city. And for our city, it's one of, are we in the real estate business or are we in the governance business? At this point in time, I've seen the Hahn Street project for approximately all 15 years I've lived here. Something's going to happen. You're going to spend the money on it, and I'm going to have to pay the taxes on that. I'm very disenchanted with that. The 6-story garage, I don't know why we even bought it in the first place, why we bought that property, why we demolished it, what the whole purpose was, but I do not think in today's climate, with the lack of business downtown, that a 6-story garage, let alone a 4-story garage, is appropriate. I think it should be turned into green space for a period of time and then in a future date addressed. I'm in concurrence with the passion against it. If you're going to build something, as the gentleman said, you might as well build it 26 stories and make it green or yellow or something, because that's going to be your legacy. Everyone's going to be referring to it as each one of your projects, and when you're 60 and 70 years old, if maybe 90 for some of you, you will have to bear the brunt of, oh, hey, that's your garage. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Ms. Ubriaco.
Hi, Carolyn Ubriaco, 432 Atwater Avenue, Elmhurst, Illinois. I just wanted to make sure that I was clear in challenging you all, challenging your role as leaders to do something different, to do something exciting, something that will add value to Elmhurst. And as a former alderman who spoke tonight, it's sometimes hard to say yes, and I know that really well. It is really hard to say yes, to do something different, to do something that maybe only a few other communities have done, to do something that is sustainable urbanism. And so I would urge you to say yes to Banner and for our architects and the Conservation Design Forum team, because they're offering our community something different, something modern, something engineered, and something well thought out. I know it's going to be really hard to say yes to that, but I think that if you look at the project, you analyze it, visit other sites, look at the features very, very carefully, there's a lot to work with there. And I also wanted to let you know that I have a Pinterest board, which, you think of Pinterest as being sort of the purview of DIY and things like that. But if you do a Google search on my name, Carolyn Ubriaco, Pinterest, and storm water management, 3 words, you'll find a board with a lot of very modern, successful stormwater management installations, things that are actually being done, and some of the features and some of the ideas that Conservation Design Forum and FAR Architects have either been a part of or are doing currently. So thank you.
Anyone else at this time, before we wrap up public forum, public comments? Is there anybody at this time who did not have an opportunity to sign up but would wish to address the council? Karen, I assume you're not raising your hand? Okay. We will close the public comments, and we will move on to agenda item 3 of our Committee of the Whole, which is business before the committee. As I'm sure the committee, the council is aware, we have 2 items on the agenda tonight. One is the continued discussion of Addison Street parking deck, and the second is the discussion of the Hahn Street applications. So, let me set up agenda item 3A, which is continued discussion, redevelopment, or of the Addison Street parking deck. I'll remind the council that we did have conversation. We actually had a presentation that brought us up to speed by Assistant City Manager Kopp. That took the full hour that we had allotted at the time. We had a follow-up meeting that ran a little bit longer. And the gist of it is that city staff is seeking further direction from this council to move this project forward. We currently are under contract with Addison LLC for a 4-story deck. I do know that Assistant City Manager Kopp does have some additional information that was requested, and he'll be presenting that. Some of the 3D visuals he was attempting to pull together. I'll summarize, as I did last time, where I think we are, and hopefully give us a target for tonight as well. So Assistant City Manager Kopp will give us that information. Other items that I would hope to move forward on this evening would be whether or not it's the will of the council or the committee, in this case, to have a loading dock, which is required by our current zoning. Whether or not we have a loading dock to be discussed. There has been discussion of a height variance. So right now I believe 45 is what's allowed. If it's the will of this committee to go beyond that, that's something that we need to determine. We got pretty far on ingress and egress, but I would like to get consensus on that tonight. There was an additional request to discuss stormwater and anything possibly we can do with this project. Lastly, since our last meeting, a couple of aldermen have approached me as well, wanting to discuss design, which I certainly think is appropriate. Before I ask for Assistant City Manager Kopp to give us the information he has, I'll say this. I talked with, well, of all the things that I listed, there's 2 things that would require further action to happen if we so choose. And that is, if the council chooses not to have a loading dock or doesn't believe that this project requires a loading dock, that would require a variance to our current zoning code. In addition, if this council or if the committee decides that we want to build something higher than 45 feet, as was discussed last time, that would also require basically the city as applicant, to go to zoning and planning and ask for variances on both of those two items, the loading dock and the height. The other stuff is stuff that I think that we can continue to discuss in parallel to that process. It's ingress and egress, possible stormwater mitigation as part of this, additional design comments. That's something that we can do as this process moves forwards. At the end of the day, I did talk to City Attorney Storino. With a group of this size, he felt, I asked for his recommendation, he felt it was appropriate, and I also discussed it with city staff, that much like any committee that we have, whether it's finance or public works, ultimately, if one or two of those that require additional action on the city staff's part relating to zoning and planning, if one of two of those is a consensus coming out of tonight, I would be requesting that city staff write a report, much like they would for any committee, that we can all review and then vote on to move forward at a city council meeting. So that's my setup for tonight. That's my hope as the way things would go. I think that allows for the discussion, a kickoff. So City Manager, Assistant City Manager Kopp, why don't you show us what you have and be prepared, I think, to flip back and forth a lot during comment. I did get a quick preview of this earlier this evening, and I'll say this. How many slides you got, Mike? Maybe 8, 10?
15.
15 slides. I think let's let Assistant City Manager Kopp buzz through them, because you'll pick up a theme, and then when the conversation starts, he should be able to find what you're looking for. Go ahead.
Real quick, there were a couple of things that were asked for the last meeting. One was to reconcile the traffic counts between the 2006 downtown plan and what we did in the C4 district. We looked at the area outside the C4 district that was in the downtown plan and reconciled the numbers within 1%. So we think those numbers are accurate numbers. Number two were some suburban locations that have parking decks of 5 levels or greater, and I think we gave about 8 or 9 of those out. I have copies of them on the computer if you want to see them again. And then last was some 3-dimensional modeling on the deck. There was another question that was asked, and I apologize, Alderman Deuter brought this up, and Alderman Healy did also. I didn't have it in the packet of stuff, but the construction cost of the deck. At the 4-story deck, we're estimating between like $10.5 to $11.5 million. And then the 2 additional levels, which were part of the proposal from Arco Murray, Edison LLC at the time, was about $2.7 million for the two additional stories, or 2 additional levels of parking. 2.7 million total. And then the 3D modeling of some of the different views. And what I did is just took a photo from where the views, taking a look from, and then putting a variety of different size buildings on here and different options. This is what you see right now. It's a current view. There's nothing right now. We're at for the 135 Addison right now. This is the apartment building next door to it, the Zell's Hobby Shop and the Pizza Palace building right here. Just give you where we're looking from. This would be a 45-foot high building, and how it lays out as compared to the building next to it, and the look from this vantage point at First and Addison. This is a 65-foot parking deck. And these are all on the lot line. I don't have any photos on here with the 6-story sticking out. This is just a on the lot line alternative. This would be a parking deck. You do 55 feet in the front and then 65 in the back. And what that would be is there's 3 bays of parking. You remove 1 bay, and construction-wise that can be done. You lose about 50 spots per section that's removed. And this is a 45 back to 65. So the 2 top levels will only be 2 bays rather than 3 bays. And again, you lose about 100 spots in this configuration. And again, we talk about the numbers of the different levels, and those numbers can vary probably 5 to 8% due to construction, but those numbers are, we looked at the maximum potential for the different levels. This would be the view from the west. Currently how it looks right now with the different buildings, the theater building behind it over here. Again, the apartment building over here. This would be a 45-foot building. What we did is we just took it and we said if we had to put a column here to hold this up, there would probably be 4 or 5 columns throughout the
to share the walkway, but to make the walkway appear wider, be 21 feet rather than just 15 feet. This is a 45-foot high building in this location. And again, the design of the building can be whatever it is we'd like it to be. That's a 65-foot building as compared to the apartment building next to it. Again, you could do this offset where it's 55 at the street and 65 behind it. You don't see the 65 here because from this vantage point, you wouldn't see it as it's set back. This is the 45-foot height with a 65 in the back. And then a view from the north, currently what it looks like today. Again, there's nothing here. It's the current view right now. This is a 45-foot building, 65-foot building. This is the 55 in the front with the 65 in the back. One bay of parking would be removed. And then again, the 45 with the 65-foot in the back. And then one other photo, just as to look at what it would look like. This is the municipal surface lot right now. If we would move forward with doing RFP on that, this is a 45-foot building on that lot, which is by right as we speak, just to see what the look would be like if you had a 45-foot building on both sides of the street. And that was all the slides I had on there.
Okay. Who wants to open the discussion?
Should we start with the loading dock?
What a great idea. Would anybody like to comment or opine on whether or not they believe that a loading dock is necessary for this project? Alderman Hipskin.
I think we talked about the loading dock quite a bit last time, and Alderman York brought up the point. Look, we're going to have retail on the first floor. A loading dock initially was for loading and unloading. I think that there's going to be some loading if, let's say we get a restaurant, a thimble store, and a hobby shop. I think that it's the unloading will be people buying the merchandise, and the loading will be UPS bringing it in. So I really don't see a whole lot of necessity for a loading dock. And remember, by not having a loading dock, that frees up a lot of space. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in support of not having a loading dock. Seeing that there's only one in the city, I believe, in that area that hasn't been used in quite some time, should validate the fact that it's fairly not necessary to conduct. And I agree with Alderman Hipskin that I think the unloading will come with the patrons, and the loading will come from, I don't want to discriminate, FedEx or UPS.
Or
Thank
any
you,
other
Mr. Mayor.
service that may be in town.
Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think before we decide, what's going to come in and what's going to go out of this building, since we're proposing that we have a very active first floor retail component to this, I think that this space is something that is, it's kind of difficult to talk about should it have a loading dock or should it not have a loading dock, and just to assume that that it's just UPS and FedEx coming in and out of there. I think what we need to talk about also should include what we want to happen on the street in front of this building. What traffic is going to be blocked, what is coming in and out of this. There's not there is an alley off the back. The plan, the very thoughtful, comprehensive plan that we did for downtown clearly states that it was the desire of the city at the time to move those kinds of services into the alleys. Alleys are great opportunities to keep undesirable activities off of a street where you're trying to encourage pedestrians and bicycles and cars to all be friendly together. And having trucks stopped in front of a business blocking traffic can be problematic. So I think that the real underlying discussion needs to be, what do we want to happen on the street? What do we not want to happen on the street? And where do we move that activity to? So personally, I've tried to drive down York with a variety of trucks and vehicles and business owners trying to unload things into their buildings on York Street. And it can be very difficult. It can be very difficult to find a parking place. I assisted a business that came into Elmhurst that didn't have alley access, just get a place where they could unload merchandise for their store. The more difficult we make it for them to unload merchandise, the more difficult we make it for business owners to operate. So all of these pieces come together in my mind to argue for a space that is a support space off the main street that allows a business to be successful without blocking other kinds of activities on the street. Especially when we add into this thought the proposal that this parking deck overhang the sidewalk. We've been talking that in order to make the geometry of the parking deck work, it needs to be wider than the lot line. So it needs to overhang the sidewalk by 6 feet in order to provide appropriate turning for vehicles. So that proposal led to some sketches we saw where there was no street parking in front of the building. So if there's no street parking in front of the building, there are no designated parking spaces, now we're in the traffic lane. And if we're in the traffic lane loading and unloading, traffic's not moving. I think we need some space in this building to provide for those kinds of support services. If a restaurant goes into this space, the restaurant needs a place for restaurant garbage, which is particularly noxious, and it can be, to be collected. Where should that happen? It should happen in the alley, off the back. And so I don't think we can dismiss this as it's just a UPS truck without really thinking bigger about how all of this functions. So I think we need it.
Other comments regarding the loading dock? Alderman Braham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Excuse me. I don't even want to call it a loading dock, and I think Alderman Gutenkopf's point is went in the same direction. I think we need some loading space. I think it's irrelevant on what we have today. I like to, as some of our residents and one of our former aldermen have stated this evening, put the goal high. Let's reach for the stars here. Just because we don't have it today doesn't mean it's not a necessity. Alderman Gutenkopf's points, and I won't go over every single one that she just made, was dead on. We need to make sure, if we're going to make downtown user-friendly, pedestrian-friendly, we need to make sure we put the appropriate vehicular, pedestrian traffic in the correct spots. In front of the building is not. I'm sure everybody on the dais has driven down First Street when there's any type of a truck in any of those diagonal or even parallel parking spots. The line of sight is horrible. Waiting for them to back out into you is horrible. It doesn't make it pedestrian friendly. We're just asking for more trouble. Let's go back to the basic fundamentals here, which is safety. I don't think it's the safest thing to do is to say that we're going to create a brand new development and let's leave delivery trucks or any type of trucks larger than a car in front of the building, the retail/parking garage on Addison. The current proposal, which, I won't go there. The current proposal is using up every single square footage and then some. Then let's say we're going to throw trucks or any other delivery vehicles in front of the building just to add to the confusion. We're killing line of sight. We're really taking a chance in safety. So I think there's a necessity. I don't care if you call it a loading dock. I don't care if you say it happens in the back of the building itself in the quote-unquote alley, but we need a space to ensure that all deliveries are done off of Addison.
Any additional comments? Alderman Levin.
The city of Chicago, of course, downtown uses a series of alleys, and all the deliveries are accomplished through the alleys, and it's very orderly. The alleys are not for regular traffic. If you deliver, you go north to south, east to west, and the trucks proceed in an orderly fashion. That's what the alleys are for there. My concern here is that this alley, with the proposed donut hole potential development, with the kinds of parking that are all back there in the alley, make it less of a traditional alley than you see in other cities and other parts of our city. We have people coming in, employees who are coming in to park. We have people who access their buildings through the back, not just for deliveries, but for back access. We talked about part of the development being making something happen back there. We saw some slides from St. Charles, Illinois, and how they had a back door that looks like a front door. Most of the businesses, in fact, I think all the businesses in Elmhurst, including restaurants, deliver through the front. The deliveries are not done at night when it's peak traffic. When I go to the train in the morning, I see they're making their deliveries long before most people are up and about. So I add that all together with the concept that we've got a parking garage that we're trying to make work, and the safety issue is we want to provide for a walkway in the back that's protected. That's the safety issue. So I would be one that would be in favor of saying this is not a building that needs to have a loading dock.
Thank you. Mr. Kopp, can you pull up something from your slide presentation of 2 weeks ago? Just to take a look at Do you have one close up that highlights maybe the walkway a little more? Maybe a closer view, or maybe you could zoom in on that one that you had there.
Yeah, slide 28.
Okay. Okay. Just a quick question, Mr. Kopp. The way the design is currently set up, should there be a loading dock? I just want to make sure I got my facts straight. Would it be in the southeast corner of this building?
It could be just about anywhere in the building, but that's what the last design that was contemplated was, showing it right in this area right here.
Okay. Okay. If you could keep that up during this discussion. Any additional comments as it relates to a loading dock? Alderman Deuter.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the unresolved issue, and I think Alderman Levin kind of referred to this, is how the traffic flows in the alleyway. And I feel like that's an unresolved issue. I don't know if we've had a chance to have any of the traffic consultants look at and kind of envision how the traffic would flow back there. I guess that's a question.
We did have it looked at, to the fact that the way it's shown up here with the one-way going off of York Street, exiting on 2nd Street, doesn't work because of the turning radiuses going in off of right here for a truck getting in here, because this building has a turn on it right here, and that causes if you go in, there's a bollard right here to keep trucks from hitting that turret, what they did in the past. But the turning radiuses work if you bring the traffic through this way and then out this way. You have to limit the truck to about 33, 34 feet, something like that, from what we looked at, the turning radiuses on a truck of that size. But then again, it could stay two-way also. But one of the benefits of one-way traffic is that if there's a truck back here for delivery, it's one-way traffic, you can still go around that truck to get around it. You can do it on two-way traffic too, but it's not that busy of an alleyway.
Yes, Alderman Deuter.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my position would be, as it relates to the safety issue in the alley, that it sounds to me like it's not a great space to encourage more traffic. I think that was some of the concern that came out of the Zoning and Planning Commission. And I think in light of that, I think I would be fine with this building not having a loading dock.
Okay. Alderman Leader.
I would only say, if the loading dock will interfere with the development of the donut hole, then I am against it.
Any other? Alderman Mulliner.
I'm opposed to putting a loading dock on this particular building because I think that we're going to create an issue where if we do any additional development as it relates to the donut hole, we're going to cause ourselves some problems. We do have to handle the waste material, I understand that, but those can be handled in a number of different ways, such as restricting the time that the garbage trucks come in to pick up the materials, having areas where that material is stored that's very easily accessible. Most of those facilities would have that, and we would have that in this facility as well, because we have to have a place to store the trash. So I would be opposed to putting in a loading dock in the back. I think the front is the appropriate way to get the materials into this particular building.
Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So what I'm hearing is that my fellow aldermen believe that the back of the building is more important than the front of the building, and that the back of the building, where there's going to hardly be any traffic at all, because frankly it's a few people accessing their mostly all-day parking for their businesses, versus the envisioned vibrant streetscape of Addison Street, where we're now putting another business in, because what we want to do is encourage a lot of shoppers, and we want to encourage a lot of movement, and we want to encourage people to come in and out of the parking deck. Really, that's the more appropriate place to put the loading and the delivery for the very vibrant retail space that we're about to build. So that's what I'm hearing you all say, is that the back of the building, where all we're trying to do is direct some traffic in and out of an area that is not going to be very desirable parking anymore, because now we have a shiny new parking deck, that's the place where you don't think we should put delivery trucks? I'm flabbergasted. I'm just stunned that you really believe that we should be loading the business on and off the main street, the street that you all now want to develop, because we're putting a big parking deck to support all this new development. That's where we should put loading docks? I just can't believe it. I'm stunned. I obviously don't agree with you, and I obviously think that that would be a substantial fail when we're building a brand new building and we have this great opportunity to finally move support services off the main street, and you don't want to do it because the back of the building is more important to you than the front. Okay, do whatever you want. It's 10 o'clock at night, and this is nuts.
Any other comments? Alderman Mulliner.
Yes, I believe that it's the necessity to move it there is for a number of different reasons, and a large number of them relate to safety. When you're talking about the fact that we're trying to make a pedestrian walkway that is user-friendly going from York to Addison, and if we have loading vehicles going down that alleyway, we're now creating a safety issue that is much bigger than worrying about whether a few delivery trucks show up periodically during the day to hand out some materials and get those into the retail shops that are going to be on Addison and on that little bit of the walkway that's going to be there. I think that our issue is safety more than it is anything, and the fact that, let's be perfectly honest, we go back to the same statement and we can say it over and over again, there's one loading dock in the downtown central district. I know that precedent doesn't matter, but it does to some degree, and it's the Plas one, and it's been sitting there and it hasn't been used in, I'll bet you, 20 years. I bet they couldn't even get the back doors open if they wanted to.
I'll go to Alderman Bram in just a second. Certainly want to fully vet this. However, I will remind everyone that it's 10 after 10 at night. I am certainly looking for comments, but as it relates to this loading dock, if there's any questions or any pieces of information you don't think you have, let's try to get those out in the open. I think I'm sensing that people are pretty solid in their opinions. If there's any ambiguity or anybody uncertain, we can certainly continue the debate. But let's try to keep an eye on the time, because we've got another big discussion right after this. I'll go to Alderman Bram, then I'll go to Alderman Healy.
Thank you. I agree with Alderman, it is getting late. I agree with Alderman Mulliner. It is about safety. Maybe the idea of a pedestrian walkway in this area is the wrong idea. The primary area that we're trying to protect and generate pedestrian traffic is Addison and York. By putting big commercial vehicles on Addison or York, that's a deterrent. That's a safety hazard. So maybe we're looking at this all wrong and trying to create something that doesn't fit in this project, and that is the pedestrian walkway in the back of the building. So I encourage people to consider the safety of Addison, and I don't care what we've done in the past. I want to improve things moving forward. And that's the biggest thing. I think the reason why we have such struggles when we debate this is we're looking at stuff piecemeal and not considering what the whole comprehensive plan says. And I think that's why a lot of us have differing opinions, because we need to look at this more holistically compared to just this one piece, one portion. My concern is safety, and it always will be, and I think that we should first take care of our main priority, which is Addison Street safety. And if we have any benefit of generating additional traffic behind, around, on top, on the side of the building, albeit, but by not doing a loading space, we are preventing that from happening.
Alderman Healy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't want to say I'm ambivalent about it, but I don't see this as a major sticking point one way or the other. We certainly have one other issue that's going to be substantial. I'm not going to get all worked up over a loading dock. The reality is that if we don't put a loading dock in, businesses that go in there in the retail space, their distribution companies, their distribution arms, whatever, who's ever going to make those deliveries, UPS, FedEx, whomever, will adapt to what we do. They do it now. They do it now in every city in the country. They do it at all hours. They're really good at that stuff. So if we don't put a loading dock in, I'm not concerned about too much, to be very honest. I understand the concern about safety. I don't see it. But that's me, and as Alderman Bram said, we're all going to have lots of different opinions and lots of different ways of looking at things. But my confidence comes in of the businesses and whoever they may be, and their distribution arms, their distribution wings, their delivery companies have a way of working things out, because that's what they do, and they, like I said, they do it in every city in the state. So, I'm leaning to no loading dock, because in the big scheme, I just don't think it matters that much.
Alderman Dunn.
Just a quick clarification question. How much productive space do we lose by implementing a loading dock into this design? How much retail space do we lose? Do we know that figure? So I haven't seen it.
I don't remember what the requirements are for the dock. You remember, Jim? 12 feet wide, 15 feet high. I don't remember the depth of it.
I was looking for it in the code to see if there were dimensions, and our code doesn't define it based on each design, I think. So we'd have to get back to you on that, Alderman Dunn.
Do we have a rough estimate? We don't have to have exact numbers.
Well, I think it's got to be 15 feet high in clearance. I think it's got to be 12 feet wide. So it'd be this area right back here on the parking deck. I mean, obviously we lose this space right here. And a question had come up about garbage and refuse. The idea was this ramp goes up right here, and the idea was there'd be bins back here with dumpsters for the garbage. I don't have the square footage as far as what the retail space would be.
If it's 40 feet deep, maybe 500 square feet roughly.
Alderman York, let me throw this out there, and then if you want to jump in. I think Alderman Healy hit it on the head. This is not the biggest decision we're going to be making tonight. I did talk to City Attorney Storino about how to handle stuff like this during a committee of the whole with this amount of people. Certainly it's appropriate to ask for motions and votes if deemed necessary. I think that might be the case for the next item we're going to tackle, but for this case, I'm going to give this one a shot. Can I get a show of hands of the aldermen who are in favor of not having a loading dock as discussed this evening? Can I get a show of hands of aldermen who are not in favor?
Point of order, I mean, isn't that like taking a vote?
It is like taking a vote. I'm just trying to expedite. I can do either one. If you want to vote, we can do a vote, but this is just trying to move it along at 10:15 at night. And ultimately, can I see? And ultimately, we're going to do a report at the end of this, and we can vote on that, the motion on that report. So, can I just see a raise of hands right now of who doesn't want a loading dock? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I would call that a pretty good consensus. So, when we get to the end and we wrap up what report we're going to do, whether or not it's a separate report or included, the recommendation and consensus out of the council is no loading dock. As a reminder, as I stated earlier, that would require the city as an applicant to go back to zoning and planning. That having been said, I think the other issue that we should tackle at this point at 10:15 at night is the height, and whether or not this council wants to consider the parking deck under contract is 45 feet, I believe. The question is whether or not this council wants to consider a deck that is higher, 65 feet, 85 feet. I think both were on city manager, assistant city manager Kopp's presentation. Anybody want to open this one up? Comment with regard to the height of the parking deck? Alderman, I'll go to Alderman Kennedy, then I'll go to Alderman Leader.
Thank you, Mayor Morley. I just have a quick question related to what Assistant City Manager Kopp presented with the different heights of, you know, all at 45, 45 to 55, 55 to 65. If we go for any one of those variations of 55 to 65, obviously we have to go for that variation, but are we having to decide on that tonight, or just saying if the will of the council is to go at one, either the entire or a portion, that's what we're kind of going after? Any portion of the building that's 65, we would be
I think that
opening it up for that.
ultimately anything over 45 would require actually a setback of the whole building itself. Yes?
Correct.
So I think the determination would be whether we want to go beyond that. I guess there is a little wiggle room in terms of how the design would be. I know that Mr. Kopp was kicking around that idea of cakewalking it back a little bit, if you will. Certainly, if we come to a decision on that tonight, great. We can do that as well. So I think it's at the will of the council. If we do go above the 45 feet, though, just stepping the building back isn't following code. You actually, the height of the building, you would actually have to step back the footprint. So my point is, even if you select the full 6 stories as one of the slides depicted, or 6 stories with a setback, it still requires a variance. Is that clear as mud?
Yep, thank you very much.
Alderman Leader, the floor is yours.
Thank you. If I may, try to put this in some perspective. Elmhurst owes its historical existence and its prosperity to being on the main rail line to Chicago. This has enabled our people for generations to travel to the great sprawling and smoky city, to work and earn, and then return to the green and pleasant land of Elmhurst. It is because of that rail line that we have always had a larger than normal need for free and abundant parking downtown. Because without it, commuters would have no place to leave their cars for the day, and they would cease to be commuters, and their reason to live here would also cease. This debate is not really about 45 or 65 feet, but about the viability of our downtown, the value of our homes, and the continuing existence of our city as a desirable place to live. For no city has a future without a viable and thriving downtown, and no downtown can remain viable and thriving without free and abundant parking. We not only need a great deal of parking for rail commuter use, but also to sustain and lure new businesses into our downtown. A viable downtown is a revenue engine that creates new sources of revenue, which helps to relieve the burden on the existing taxpayer base, meaning you. It can also be an exciting and exhilarating destination, a safe place for you and your children to enjoy, which sends out its lush tendrils of prosperity via our home values to the furthest reaches of Elmhurst. I know of nothing writ in stone that says we cannot build above 45 feet in our downtown core. We already have several buildings that are taller. This need for parking to satisfy the voracious needs of our downtown merchants and our rail commuters has led to the building of parking decks, each of which has cost substantially more, adjusted for inflation, than the previous one. Future decks will cost even more. Better to build it now for less than later for more. One thing is for sure, when we reach the point that no additional parking is needed, or that we need less parking for our core downtown, then that is the day that the grass will grow in the streets, and the value of your homes will have died with the downtown. We have had this debate for years. There are some people who regard change as a disease to be avoided at all cost. There are those who want to plan, survey, advise, coordinate, and encourage, but not act. Delay amounts to abandonment. We no longer have the option to make haste slowly. A great wave of exciting growth and development awaits our action on this dais. What we need is courage, daring, imagination, intelligence, and a sound grasp of the broad arc of events to make it a reality. There are no villains here. We all care deeply about Elmhurst. Yet a real difference does exist between us, and it appears that it is in the region where things cannot be fully proved, in feelings about consequences, in ultimate intentions. There are those who view our debate through the prism of their own fears. There are those who have nostalgia for the past, but who cannot accept the reality of the present or the possibilities of the future. There are those who believe a taller parking deck will change the character of Elmhurst. I disagree. It will save the character of Elmhurst. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Alderman Leader. Always enjoyable. Who would care to follow Alderman Leader? The brave Alderman Deuter is going to jump in.
This project is important to me because it's important to the residents of the First Ward. We heard from residents who were opposed to the six-story structure at the Zoning and Planning Commission hearings. We've heard from nearly 200 residents who signed a petition opposing a six-story structure. And I've heard from many more residents opposed to a 65-story structure, 65-foot structure, recently from emails and conversations. I think we probably would have heard from even more residents, but I think there's a large group of residents and perhaps even a majority who believe that if this is something we're considering it, then we must have good reasons for it. Data to support the need and images to show it's suitable to our downtown. I don't think this information currently exists to back us up. I think the supporting information is critical because in this case, we are contemplating a structure that is inconsistent with our existing vision of our downtown. In 2006, there was a rigorous public process that created the downtown plan. That downtown plan was subsequently adopted and incorporated into the comprehensive plan adopted in 2009. And that plan, both of those plans, say that the vision that exists for our downtown is that it should predominantly be 2 to 4 story structures. And while there are allowances that in some cases a taller building may make sense, The downtown plan also says that parking garages should complement the existing downtown in terms of their size and bulk. I think there are good reasons why 6-story structures are not allowed as of right. A 6-story structure would be significantly taller than every building surrounding it. I think the images we saw tonight help to give us some sense of that. But I don't think we've fully gotten our arms around what a 65-foot structure would look like. That structure would provide more than 3 times the number of parking spaces provided at the large deck. We heard Manager Kopp referred to some pictures that came to City Council that showed parking decks in other suburban areas that are 5 or more stories. And I think there were about 10 pictures, and if you look at them carefully, the majority of them show taller buildings surrounding those large parking decks. I can appreciate the logic that we've heard a few times tonight, that to the extent we have the opportunity to build parking, we should build as much as possible. And some examples of this were the expansions that the city made at the Schiller and Adelaide decks. You know, I think we need to be careful about how we use those examples, because in hearing people talk about them, I actually had the impression that we constructed the deck and turned around, and almost as soon as they were finished, we added more parking to them. And the reality is, in the case of Schiller, we added more parking 12 years later. At Adelaide, we added more parking 9 years later. I think in both of those cases, my guess is that we built the parking that was required at the time, and down the road, when there was more parking demanded, we asked the taxpayers at that time to pay for it. I don't think it's a good practice to ask today's taxpayers to foot the bill for parking that may or may not be required in the future, to support development that may or may not happen in the future. My sense is that the additional parking beyond the 500 or so spaces that would be provided by a 45-foot structure is not a priority of today's taxpayer, and I don't think we should be asking them to pay for it. We are contemplating stormwater management projects that will be 10 or tens of millions of dollars, and I don't believe we have the resources to meet non-critical needs. Each expense that we make should be carefully evaluated, and I don't think we should lose sight of our priorities. I want to add that I support the construction of a 45-foot tall parking garage on the Addison site. I support it, and I would like to see it happen as expeditiously as possible. I am concerned that by attempting to move forward with a structure taller than 45 feet, we are setting ourselves up for contentious public hearings with an unknown outcome. I also think the taller structure would require the collection of data to justify the expense. I think that's something that we owe to the taxpayers. And instead of going through that process, I would like to focus our time and attention to finalizing a design for the 45-foot structure and allow that construction to happen as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Additional comments? Alderman Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. More of an ask of Assistant City Manager Kopp. You obviously were here when they built the Schiller deck and then added on to the Schiller deck. You gave us some numbers about this, going from 45 to 65 feet adds $2.7 million to the bill, yes?
Correct.
You remember what that's roughly about a 20% increase in cost, yes? Somewhere around there. So do you remember what the cost and increase was between the Schiller decks, since it was 12 years in between?
Adelaide deck, I know that was built in 1991, added on to in 2003. In 1991, we built it for 211 spaces at a price of $1.92 million. In 2003, we added 98 spots for $1.9 million. I can look up Schiller deck here. I just know Adelaide off the top of my head for some reason.
Alderman Wagner.
Could you repeat that, Mike?
Yeah, we built the original deck, 211 spots, $1.92 million. We added on to in 2003, added 98 spots, and for $1.91 million.
Roughly the same amount of money.
Correct.
For half the amount of spaces.
Correct.
13 or whatever it is, 6 years later.
And I'll give you Schiller decks, it wasn't as bad.
I just wanted to make sure that we all understood those numbers. That's on a small scale.
It was 1992 and 2001. Schiller deck was 1991 and 2003.
Thanks, Mike.
Any additional comments? Alderman Mulliner.
We all know that parking downtown is an issue. We all know that no matter how often we go down there, there's times when you can find parking places, but a lot of the time you can't. One of the biggest complaints we hear, not just from the merchants, but from all the individuals that I talk to who are going down to try to do shopping is, I can't find a parking place. I can't find a parking place. We have an opportunity right now to be able to have an impact on the downtown to provide the necessary parking. And Alderman Leader clearly stated one of the things that's the most important thing for us to keep in mind, and that is that our retail is what drives our community, especially the city. If we make sure that we have the best retail we can and we're bringing in those tax dollars in that form, then we're not going to have to burden the homeowners for some of those taxes. The more retail we have, the better our tax base is going to be. If we want to have more retail, better retail, we need to make sure that we've provided the necessary parking so that that excuse goes away. Right now, we have that as an excuse. We have every business around that says that's what the problem is. We know that that is a problem. When we look at the numbers, Assistant City Manager Kopp has given us numbers. If we were to build the parking that we need in any other zoning area other than downtown, we would need significantly more parking than what we're looking at even here. This is just going to provide the necessary parking for people to come downtown and enjoy a downtown that we're trying to make as vibrant as possible. If we want to see the western side of Addison developed, we need to make sure that we're providing the necessary parking. If we don't provide the parking, then we have to take up space on the western side of Addison in order to provide that parking. It's much better to have that parking for retail in the core, in the middle of the area where the people are going to go and shop. That core area is critical, and that's why we need to look at this Addison location, and I think we need to maximize what we can do here. I think we've got a good shot at it. Alderman Wagner hit it right on the head with the numbers. You know, we're looking at a 20% increase by going up 6 stories. I support the 6 stories at this point.
Alderman Palomsky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think most, if not all of us, agree that the need for parking is immediate, and I first want to say that I hope this project moves forward as quickly as possible. Speaking to height, I think structures 6 stories tall do have a place in our downtown. They may be entirely appropriate, but I think they require more scrutiny than those with 4. We need to think more carefully about design and about appearance. And when a building is taller than those surrounding it, it draws our attention. And I understand that all 14 of us will have different ideas of what makes a building attractive, but to consider a 6-story development, I'd want to have a better idea of the design. And with the rough drawings that we saw today for the first time, the option of the 65-foot structure that has 45 feet at its front seems to be fitting with the street and with the character of downtown, so that was nice to see as an option. It's difficult to know what type of additional development 2 more stories will bring in the 2 more stories of parking would bring in the future. And I think it's not really appropriate to consider the height of this parking garage based on the current needs, because we need to also think about what's to come. I'm uncertain on this, on 6 stories for sure. I fully support 4 stories. I think with 6 stories, I'd need to consider more about the design and the appearance and how it fits, and of course all the safety issues addressed that brought up through the commission. But I think it's very possible for 6 stories to work here, and I think we can't take it off the table. Thanks.
Alderman Hipskin.
I would ask city staff if they could look and see for different architectural examples of 6 stories or just, different examples that, either contractors can give us, not stuff that they necessarily had to do. I don't care if it's from California or, New York, but just some of those design aspects to give us a better visual feel of what we can make these look like. I've seen some that are very attractive. So and by the way, I'm in favor of 65 feet.
Okay. Anybody who has not had a chance to speak at this time? Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I make comments, I guess I have a procedural question. Is it our hope tonight to come with a council consensus whether we definitely want a 6-story structure or a 4-story structure, or is staff looking for council direction to proceed potentially, if it's the will of the council, to go back before zoning and planning to see if a 65-foot structure would even pass muster with them? Or are you looking for a definite, guys, we're doing 65 or 45?
Well, what we're looking for is the will of the council tonight. If we can reach a consensus tonight on the height, pick your height. If we can reach a consensus on it, if it's over 45 feet, the next step would be for this committee of the whole to ask city staff to write a recommendation, much like any committee, that would, let's just say, hypothetically, let's just say that the consensus is we want to stick with 45 stories, 45 stories. 6 doesn't sound so bad now, does it? Let's say we decided to stick with 45 feet, but we didn't want the loading dock. Then we would instruct city staff to write a report as such, and part of that report would be the recommendation for city staff to put the application in place to zoning and planning. Same thing applies to the height. So if we can come to a consensus tonight of a 65-foot height, then ultimately that is, the report would be written in such a manner that we as a committee of the whole are instructing city staff to get that ball rolling, to set up the public hearing and go to zoning and planning. Does that?
It does, thank you.
Okay.
Because here, I've listened to the conversation, I've had talks with several elected officials, I've had talks with many different people, mainly in the 5th Ward, but south side of town, and I don't get a strong sense one way or the other that there is firm opposition or firm support of a 6-story deck. There is firm support, as there is on the dais, for additional parking. I can honestly say I'm still in between. I mean, I go through days where I can envision a 6-story. I'm not afraid of a 6-story building. I have some concern about our first 6-story building in the central business district, or that concentrated downtown being a parking deck. And then there's other days where I think, yeah, we're looking ahead to the future, and is that where we're going? I'm almost thinking that we probably, well, I would be in support of a committee of the whole report that said we're okay with 65 feet so we can get the zoning and planning rolling. Not to say that I'm in support of a 65-story building per se. Because I personally think, and I've read the zoning and planning transcripts a couple times, and I know staff has addressed the concerns. I'm still not convinced that we fully address zoning and planning's concerns about a 65-story building in and of itself. So in my mind, there's still a question as to whether if we apply to, as the applicant apply for a zoning variance, that it's going to pass muster. I'd rather find that out sooner rather than later. So if that makes sense, I guess I'm in support of it, though I'm in support of moving it forward so we can get the zoning without committing myself to saying I fully support a 6-story deck. If I rode the fence.
I think I do. If I could paraphrase, it's almost as if you want to parallel path the project, possibly address a 65 height issue with zoning and planning while we continue to design and hone down. And if we get it or we don't get it, we take it for what it is. If a variance is granted, then you concentrate heavily on design. If you don't like it, you can still stick with your 4-story. But is that fair summation?
Fair.
Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I had all these great thoughts, and they're being drummed out by the little voice in my head that keeps saying, the more you spend, the more you save. Because it's late, and that's what you get on late night TV. Somebody's selling you, the more you spend, the more you save. So that's what I keep hearing when we keep talking about, well, it's only another $2-point-something million to add 2 more stories to the deck. So we're saving all this money by spending another $3 million to add 2 more floors to this parking deck, even though Alderman Deuter very eloquently pointed out that we really are lacking a lot of solid information that would help us make a solid, reasoned, research-backed decision. because there is a lot of research about parking and about how it functions and about how it shapes communities and about how communities can use parking to enhance their downtowns. In fact, in that packet of materials that you received in addition to the documents on board docs, there were a couple of things that I think would help all of us come to a well-reasoned decision about a 6-story parking deck. One of them was a packet of pictures of other big buildings, other parking decks that apparently some of us missed. Showed pictures of how they look in other towns compared to the neighborhood. I was struck as I was looking at these pictures by the fact that not a single one of these buildings is adjacent to a group of lower buildings. They were all in big, tall, built-up downtowns. I really like the one in Evanston. I'm actually familiar with that building. It's across from the movie theater where I take my mother to the movies. And it's quite imposing, next to a very, very tall apartment building, next to and across the street from a huge retail development. Maybe that's what we want for Elmhurst. It's not what I hear residents say they want for Elmhurst. It's not necessarily what I want for Elmhurst, even though, I'll admit that downtown parking can be a challenge occasionally. But I don't think it's as big of a challenge as we like to make it out to be to justify the fact that we want to spend $11 million on a parking deck. One of the other documents that I asked be circulated is this. It's called Parking Strategies to Support Livable Communities. And it's a well-researched document, a report compiled in April of 2012 by the Chicago Metropolitan Area for Planning. And this is a planning organization that helps municipalities in our entire region think about and plan for region-wide and local community planning challenges. Parking is a planning challenge. I'd like to quote from the document. This is actually on page 18. The section is titled, How to Handle Parking Demand Without Building More Parking. And it says, and I quote, without understanding the complexities of parking and its role in the transportation system, people often say, just build more parking. Parking structures are expensive, often upwards of $25,000 per space, and they rarely pay for themselves. The design and management of parking supply affects the livability and walkability of any downtown. Building additional parking without managing the existing supply can induce driving and increase the demand for even more parking. Conversely, managing the existing supply can be a cost-effective way to reduce demand or increase the attractiveness of underutilized spaces. The document goes on to talk about additional costs that we haven't even begun to consider in parking decks. Among them are parking deck maintenance fees. And that hasn't entered into our discussion at all, because the more levels we add to this potential parking deck, the more we're incrementally raising our ongoing maintenance costs to care for this parking deck. Maintenance costs that can be considerable, at least according to some of the research that they cite in the document. And I think if we're going to talk about the height of the parking deck, there are other factors that haven't even come into this conversation. I think bulk and massing are part of them. I, for one, was particularly surprised to see just how massive a 6-story block is going to look in downtown. While I appreciated the sketches with the stepped back building, it still presented a very imposing facade of a very large building that's going to change the character of our downtown. And I think these are really important considerations that none of us are talking about. They're considerations that came up when we did the downtown plan. And the downtown plan's pretty thoughtful about how we should be approaching these things. And I think there are some reasons why the downtown plan talks about pedestrian-friendly and walkability. It's because those are the things that move people through the downtown and get them into the businesses and the shops. I think that's an important consideration. I think one of the things that we've been doing is conflating our idea of a need for parking with what we think the right amount of parking is. And I don't think we know what the right amount of parking is, because I think it's been too long since we've done any real comprehensive study of who's using the parking when. You know, we heard business owners come here and speak to us and say, we need 2,500 parking spaces based on the code. And I think that's a real fallacy, because I think that, I know that's a fallacy. I know that's a fallacy because it fails to take into account shared parking. What's shared parking? Shared parking is the person who comes for lunch and uses the same parking space that the evening user who's coming to the movies is going to use later that day. That's shared parking. I'm going to come downtown and park for a couple of hours at noon, and then somebody else is going to come back and use that exact same parking space at 7 o'clock. So without a real understanding of who's parking when, we fall victim to a notion that we've got a number we can add up based on the code, and that's how much parking we need. There's a couple of other points that this document makes about parking demand and parking need and when it happens that I think are really critical ideas. I'd just like to know if anybody else had an opportunity to read this document besides me. Anybody? Oh, Alderman Deuter read it. Anybody? Thank you, Alderman York. I think this is really the way we should be shaping this conversation, because I think we're leaping to this discussion of how big it should be without a grounding in how much we need. I don't support 6 stories simply because I don't see any data that supports it. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick time check. We're at 12 minutes to 11. It would be great if we could try to wrap this up, I'd say, in the next 12 minutes. I think it's an admirable goal. I'm going to put my 2 cents in at this time. And that is to say, the number one issue for me, I already agreed, I don't know, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, whenever I voted, that we needed parking downtown, and I still think that's the case. At this point, in my opinion, the number one issue is design. I think that, and with all due respect to city staff, that was not a very good-looking design that we saw up there, and I think most of us expect something a little fancier. I know it was just for scale. But my point is, whether it's 4 stories or 6 stories, I think that design is critical. I think we can make it look like the Taj Mahal if we want, and need to be prepared to do so. I hear clearly there's concern about it fitting in the downtown area, and I hear that loud and clear. To me, I think good design could accommodate 4 or 6 stories, but design itself is key. The second thing I'll say is that while I do think there's a need for downtown parking now, I would love it if there was a greater need for downtown parking in the future. And that's really, when I consider this, it's my hope for the development or the redevelopment of areas in downtown. Mike Kopp showed us a picture where there was a 4-story building across the street from this. Right now, that's surface level parking. That's a street level parking that's owned by the city. I don't think the city would intentionally hold on to that. That's not what you're supposed to do on a main thoroughfare. You're supposed to redevelop that. And that's really the other part for me, is the redevelopment. The last thing I'll say, and then, well, 2 other things I'll say is, one is there's a serious cost consideration. The design isn't finalized, but if the debt costs $11.5 million at this height, and to increase that 20 feet to 65 feet is 2.7, I think we need to give that serious consideration. But the last thing I'll say is, and Alderman Healy brought it up, I think he came up with a very good suggestion, and that is to move this process forward. Should we choose to entertain the notion of a 65-foot building, we can parallel path this And as we continue to look at design, we aren't putting a shovel in the ground. But I do think that in terms of moving it off the block, giving city staff direction as it relates to zoning and planning is critical out of this meeting. Alderman York.
Thank you, Your Honor. Tagging along with what Alderman Healy said, I think the number one priority for this project for me is we need to get started now. And as I understand it from city staff, a 1% cost addition to consider expansion of the deck from 45 to 65 feet is about $120,000. So if we were to go ahead and kind of along the lines of what you said, go on a parallel path, but do something now so that we can start getting prepared to put a shovel into the ground and get this thing built at least to a 4-story level, knowing that anywhere along the line there we can continue on up to the 6 stories if that's the will of the council, but we got to get moving now. This thing is sitting here. I'm all for a parking study. I don't think a parking study should take 14 years and 3 months to complete. I think we should get a parking study in the next couple months. Take a look at some of the things that were in the CMAP study. It should be pretty straightforward. We need to take that information along with what you alluded to and be visionaries and say, okay, we studied the parking as it is today, but for example, we do have that lot right across the street. What do we need to do to plan for the future there? But most importantly is to get this project started sooner rather than later, including the shovels in the ground at a very minute cost of about $120,000 to make it pliable so that it can be either a 4-story deck or a 6-story deck. Thank you.
Point of clarification before I go to Alderman Healy. What Alderman York is referencing is many members of the City Council have asked the developer, hey, if we wanted to build this deck and reinforce it in such a way that we could add on to it later, they've said it's roughly 1% of the cost. So that's the 1% that Alderman York's talking about. And I'll go to Alderman Levin.
Well, at least we all seem to agree we're going to build a parking garage, which is progress from past meetings. I think I just want to clarify a couple things, maybe more for others than the council members, but when we talk about going to the ZBA, the commission never decided there shouldn't be a parking garage on Addison Street, and the only decision there was there shouldn't be a 6-story building with office space. Our developer expressed no further interest, and now whatever happens there, I think it's clear that we're making the decision. We'll be the applicant if we go, and the developer is expressed a willingness to acquiesce to what we decide to do. So when we look at what we're doing, I hear a lot of comments about planning. We haven't, that the commission said we didn't have a plan, and I don't understand how the commission said that exactly, because there's a 2006 downtown plan, which was amended in 2010, and it incorporates discussion of parking that started back in the year 2000, and it's replete with multiple references to that plan, which we have adopted, needing a general increase in off-street parking. And having that parking capacity makes Elmhurst a better town, not just retail, but I have people I know in Naperville and other towns, and they talk about how they're driving downtown. I say, well, why are you driving down? They say, well, because I'm on the list to get a parking space. When you move to Elmhurst, we have parking. It makes it livable. You don't have to worry about where you're going. Are you going to drive around all day or park illegally and get a ticket? We have parking. We make it a good place to live. I don't think we can go any slower because this project is about 5 years old, so I kept hearing people say, slow down, slow down. I won't go into, I'll just second the notion of not building it and adding on later. It's been well articulated by a number of aldermen, but I subscribe to what they say, that the 20% cost for that much more parking is well worthwhile. I'm kind of looking at a couple things here now. One of them is there has been a lot of discussion at the commission level, meaning public comment. I've received a number of letters myself, And I think some of the letters are very thoughtful. One of them went around, I think went to all the aldermen and went through a lot of important factors, and I actually received the same letter from a number of different people, so it took on sort of a petition sort of nature, but it had good information. And like Alderman Healy, I'm sensitive, and I hear from people of the First Ward that they have concerns. I can say that I've not heard those concerns from anyone outside of the First Ward, or very few people, I should say. I understand and appreciate what the First Ward residents are saying. I'm looking at it, though. It's not just a First Ward garage. I've walked around the block a few times. There's one area where you could see the height of the parking garage, and if that Addison Street lot is ever developed, those people who are on that block won't see it either, but there are very few places where you would see it unless you were actually downtown. And then I hear the questions about what are we doing to the character of Addison Street. Addison Street is desolate. It's an area crying out for redevelopment. What do we have to do to get people to go around the corner to Addison Street? And putting a parking garage there will encourage development. There will be development there. And if there's an office building, maybe it'll be across the street where we have our street surface parking. But this building characterized as imposing is not going to hurt development. It may well lead to development. Now, the design is a feature that we have to look at, and I hope it's not going to be done like this, because if 14 people can't agree on 4 or 6 stories, I hope we're not going to do the design. And I hope the public will have input. I hope there's someone else that will lead that charge. I'm pretty much in favor of 6 stories, and my only comment is I don't want to tease the Zoning and Planning Commission, because they went through some very difficult hearings on the last go-around, and I am not in favor of putting in an application for 6 stories or 5 stories or 6 stories with a setback or whatever it is, unless we really mean it, because it's going to take a lot of energy from the commission, from the people in the business community, from the residents who have concerns. So if we're going to do it, let's do it. And if we do a parking study, which I also think is a fine idea, and it changes our opinion down the road, then that's a reason to modify it. I don't believe it will, but I don't want to go out there and say, well, let's put it out there, we might go 4 or 6, we should make a decision. And we've spent a lot of time on this. I think everyone's acting in good faith. I'm likely to be the one that would cast a vote in favor of 6 stories.
Alderman Braham.
Thank you, Mayor. It is very late. When it comes to these projects, I don't know, it seems like we like to run really quick on them, then take a leisurely walk, and now all of a sudden we're running again to try to move forward. I don't disagree with moving forward with this, and I think we've had some good discussion tonight. But where I'm going with that statement is having facts, having data, myself being an engineer, to justify the need of anything above 4 stories. I don't want to say 6 stories. I don't want to say 8 stories or 5 stories, anything above what our code allows today, which is the 4 stories. We had a previous submittal of with office space, and it seemed like 4 stories of parking was sufficient then. That's what a proposal was in the middle of coming to the city council before that request was withdrawn. I'm not sure what has changed today on why we feel that there's a need for 6. Well, at least some of my colleagues have spoken to that this evening. I don't see any facts before me, and once again, I'll state, being an engineer, kind of like traffic control devices, I like to see data and facts, to me, before I spend residents' dollars. I don't see that. And as I referenced earlier, we like to run, walk, run when it comes to these major projects. We were running down this path a while ago, and if we had any thought, any notion of going above what our code allows, we should have some facts of what we really do need. We are supposed to this evening talk about the Hahn Street development. None of those proposals actually meet our code. And it seems like there was some buy-in from my colleagues on the dais, when it comes to parking, that is, some buy-in from the colleagues on the dais that is sufficient. So we're saying that we don't need that much parking there, and we don't meet the current requirements there, but here we need to go above and beyond. What are we truly saying? Is everyone, or are those who are in favor of above 45 feet or 4 stories saying that their vision of Addison Street will be above 4 stories on every parcel in the future? If that's what is being said, then let's say it out loud now. Let's take that stance. What is our vision of the future? I don't see that as the vision of the future of Addison, especially on both sides of Addison. So I don't know exactly where we're going with these statements because there's nothing to back it up. We, the city, and this plays on both sides of the argument, we, the city, have a TIF in place. And I'm saying that from the standpoint of TIF 1 is at the end. So unless we're going to do general obligation bonds for any future development in this area, which I'm sure the residents would not enjoy to see, we are very limited. So what is our vision here? I agree that it's an incremental in the grand scheme of things to say 6 stories now because the cost is lower now compared to if we add on in the future. But I could only spend the tax dollars of the residents on what I know today. And maybe it's our fault of our own that we don't have the data to prove what it is today. Maybe we should have made these decisions. But the comprehensive plan, the downtown plan, states what it states today, and that's what I'm going on. It doesn't state that our vision is 6 stories. If it did, then those of us up here would have made sure it did in the past discussions. It does not. No one's debated it before, but now we're saying that we should set a precedent here today. So to me, it's really about perception and reality. My reality is there's no data to justify 6 stories. My reality is that 4 stories was sufficient before in a previous proposal, so why isn't it today? Nobody up here has stated, or city staff has provided at least sufficient proof for myself on why we need to go 6 stories. If we do so, maybe we do incremental add-ons to this development. It has been stated in regards to vacancies on Addison, and we need this parking to make sure that we have lively retail on Addison. I don't know, we have parking alongside York, and there's just as many vacancies on York as there is on Addison. I wouldn't call Addison desolate. I would think that the businesses on Addison would beg to differ as well. I think that, we're doing what we need to develop the current time, the present of Addison, as well as the future. But unless someone puts some facts and some real data in front of me, I can't go forward with anything above 4 stories. And I think, Mr. Mayor, as we go forward with this, no matter what is the consensus of the council, I don't know, I haven't heard any of my colleagues mention anything between 4 stories and 6 stories. Maybe there is a compromise in the midst, but I think that's at least something that should have some discussion compared to taking both ends of the spectrum as we seem to have been doing tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Time check's 11:05. Does anybody want to attempt to wrap this up?
Alderman Leader?
Alderman. Very good, Alderman Bram. Alderman Wagner, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Interesting. I agree with Alderman Bram. Facts and data are certainly important. In lieu of the information from the Adelaide deck, I say those facts are very crystal clear, and I appreciate it. The fact is the Adelaide deck cost us 100% more to get it right. So I would prefer to, I'm in favor of the 65 stories because I think that is getting it right early on and not charging the taxpayers another 100% of the $12 to $11 million of whatever it ends up being. So in lieu of the 11:06 now time, I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Mayor, to direct staff to design a report or write a report on behalf of this committee that changes the zoning for the lack of the loading dock, as well as a 65-foot structure.
Given the lateness of the hour, we'll try to massage that a little bit, I guess, to make it as clear as possible.
Thank you.
I heard a motion from Alderman Wagner requesting that city staff prepare a committee, of what I would call a committee of the whole report, recommending that city staff move forward with two items that require variances. One would be to move forward with this project without a loading dock, and the other would be to move forward with this project with a height of 65 feet. Is that a fair summary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's exactly right.
We need is that adequate, City?
It is. We need a second.
So we have a motion. I'll consider that a motion for the record.
You do it.
I need a second.
Mulliner.
Alderman Mulliner would like to second.
All the way down there. Haven't heard from you.
Any additional discussion? This is kind of what I laid out at the beginning of our meeting. Should it be the will of the council, committee of the whole, to move forward on this? Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No additional points on either. I would suggest and offer, and help me with this, I would offer a friendly amendment to split those two issues.
I agree.
Given that...
And I would agree. Go ahead.
Given that it seemed to be the majority of the council was in favor of no loading dock, I don't get the sense that that's the case with 4565. I think we should split those. So I would offer a friendly amendment.
Okay, agreed. And procedurally, the motioner and the second have to agree to splitting, and I'm getting nods that they do. So the first motion, and then we'll go back to the discussion of the height. The first motion would be loading dock, instructing city staff to prepare a committee of the whole report, recommending that a loading dock not be required for this project, and that city staff go to take the appropriate steps to go to zoning and planning and another public hearing to discuss that.
I'll second that.
Close enough? Yes? Alderman Mulliner, you agree with that? Okay. That's the loading dock itself. Any additional questions or comments? Alderman Bram, you seem perplexed.
I'm not perplexed, Mr. Mayor. I'm contemplating asking a procedural question. That procedural question would be, in a committee of the whole, would we be taking a consensus or would we be voting on each of these? Can decisions be made in the committee of the whole, essentially? Yes.
I did discuss it, I did discuss it with City Attorney Storino, and yes, certainly with a committee of this size, taking a vote would be an appropriate measure of where we are.
What it's really doing is making a recommendation to yourself, is really what you're doing. Just as every committee does. It makes a recommendation to the full council. You happen to be the full council, and you're going to make a recommendation to yourself.
Okay.
Mayor?
Do we need a second on?
Yeah, Alderman Mulliner, second.
Yeah, we got Wagner, Mulliner.
I kind of following Alderman Bram's lead on the procedure. I feel like by getting motions and seconds, then we get into debate. When I feel like we've had the debate, and what is probably more of the common practice in my shorter term on the council for committees is to say, as you did before, do we have a consensus that we want to do this, and not open it up now with a motion and debate and just see who wants to go, 6, whatever, and then prepare the report. Then we'll vote, then we'll have debate on the report.
Right.
And for lack of, we won't have lack of words, then we'll actually then vote on the
Alderman Levin, I don't disagree with you. This was a belt and suspenders sort of thing, so that it would avoid any confusion. But if it's the will of the council to just do what we did with the loading dock, which was a raise of hands, and we can instruct city staff to prepare the report as such, is that a better, the council
Yes.
is okay with that as well? Either way, it achieves both things. So I'm going to ask Alderman Wagner to pull his motion.
I'll pull the motion.
And Alderman Mulliner agrees. And we had already done the straw poll vote with the loading dock, so I think we're pretty clear on that. The next question is, and I heard 65 feet, so I'm going to go with that. Can I see a show of hands from aldermen who would like to ask city staff to move forward with a plan for 65 feet and make the necessary application, begin the application process with zoning and planning. That's what I just heard. I'd like a show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's no motion pending. If you have a question, you're more than welcome.
I have a question.
All right, go ahead, Alderman York.
By doing this, are we going to get a report back and then debate?
Yes.
Because something that's very important is that we move on. I'm not going to support it if it's going to create a
This is the
6-month
next
delay.
step. There's going to be a report that we're going to have to vote on officially at City Council.
I'm in.
Raise hands again, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I see that as a consensus. City staff will be instructed to do so. Let us move on. It's getting later, and I appreciate all the folks in the audience. Agenda item 3B, discussion of the Hahn Street applicant proposals. Let me set this up really quick and see how quickly we can go through this. I think it was at the idea was ultimately Alderman Healy's. We talked about doing our grading sheet that you all have, and if you need, if anybody did not bring their grading sheet, we did print up some extras for you. There was, some of the aldermen said, I'd like to grade it, but I'd like to hear what my fellow aldermen said. That's what this meeting is. We're shooting for. Ultimately, our goal is to narrow down to a set of finalists as it's listed in the RFP. That having been said, I'm hoping we can have a good conversation, maybe get some opinions on the 5 applicants, and the ultimate goal would be to have anybody who cares to, hopefully everybody, turn this grading sheet in this week. Ideally, Wednesday, if you can. I know some of you have already told me you're done with the grading sheet. I think that's wonderful. That having been, that's my setup for that. What are we on? 3B, on-street applicant proposals. Anybody want to jump in? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Wait, whoa.
I get some nods from the audience. Who wants to start? Anybody want to talk about all of the applications? I'll start. I think we have 5 terrific applications. This is a major project. I appreciate the application, the applicants putting their time and effort into this, not only tonight, but in the proposals they got. There's certainly some differences, some design differences among other things to consider, and the financials. But that's my initial take. Anybody? Alderman Mulliner. I see people gesturing, but no hand movement.
It's okay.
I'm going to go with Alderman Mulliner.
I can go first.
If somebody else wants to go first, that's fine. You know, I was hoping for.
You drew the
leader to
straw,
go
Mr.
first.
Mulliner.
I agree. I think we've got 5 fine applications in front of us, and I think that the challenge that's in front of us at this point is to determine, as we all know, narrow this down. And I personally, I'd like to see us narrow it down to 2, no more than 3, by the end of the day or by the time we finish this grading process. I think everybody came in with some very interesting proposals. I think that when I saw the character and the design of them, that's one of the things that you weigh a little bit, but you also have to sit back and look at the numbers, and that becomes a critical piece as well. You want to make sure that what comes into the community, at least in my mind, fits into the community and is a wonderful entranceway to that north end of town. And the pedestrian friendliness, I think, is very critical. I learned a lot in listening to the Boehner solution in the fact of how they broke up the particular area to make it so that it was pedestrian friendly. And it made me understand a lot more about what I believed we needed to do in the downtown area. So I think that everybody has brought to bear a number of great ideas. I'm struggling, and I'm kind of waiting to hear what people have to say about where people are. I know that I could wait this right now and have it all finished, but I kind of want to hear what other people have to say about the projects themselves. So I really liked all of them. I think they had some great ideas, but I need to hear some other comments from other people, where they want to go.
Okay. Alderman York, did you?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. I happen to have all my my grading done. I thought we had 5 great proposals as well. And I think, kind of timely, but I kind of think this is like a Miss America contest. I think we're looking at 5 individual propositions here. They all have their merits, and some of them are beautiful in some of our eyes, and some of them aren't quite so beautiful in some of our eyes. So,
Wait for the bathing suit.
and I think then what you also have here, I don't know if I'll use the right term or not, but you, besides the Miss America contest, you have the dowry. What comes with the potential? Is that the right word? Is that?
You have got the press burning up right over there, I gotta tell you.
So I looked at it on the financial side and rated that. It's pretty cut and that is something that's, as some people like to say, is filled with facts and figures and easier to decipher. So I've got mine done, and I'm going to turn mine in at the conclusion of the meeting, and I'll listen patiently, but I'm ready to move on. Thank you.
Okay. I'll go to Alderman Gutenkopf. Let me add real quick, and I think you kind of referenced this, Alderman York, but this is a little bit of a, I don't want to say a balancing act, but there is a whole other round here when we determine these finalists, and there's a whole other page and a half, maybe even more, of additional information that we will be asking of the finalists. So we're going to, I see this as a process where we dig as deep as we can right now with the information we have, get some clarification, which Assistant City Manager Kopp consolidated a bunch of questions, I know, and gave us a bunch of answers. So I just, my point would be, there is a limited number of information we're going to get now because we're asking for a whole bunch more as soon as we go on to the next phase. Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess it's sort of a procedural question. Is it your expectation, the staff's expectation, that you're going to take the scores and from that narrow it down to the finalists to pursue? Or are you expecting that the scores will engender more conversation about how we arrived at those numbers? Because if you are not expecting to have that conversation, then I think we need to be having it now.
It's a good question, Alderman Gutenkopf, and I kind of mentioned this last time when we went through this. When you develop an RFP, develop it as specific as possible to hopefully get apples to apples comparisons when they come in. But after they come in, the process gets a little fluid and opens up a little bit. So I think that we all agree that we're trying to get to finalists. We do reference in our RFP that we will give serious weight to what the grading is. In this case, what I see, and in talking to city staff, is that we'll discuss whatever we discuss tonight. If people have more questions, great, but we're asking people to fill out their scorecards or their grading sheets. City staff will summarize those, and then at our next meeting, whether we decide to have committee of the whole on the 23rd of next Monday, whether we want to do, and we'll discuss that at the very end of this meeting, whether we want to do a fifth Monday meeting, which is the 30th, or even another committee of the whole if we need the time on October 7th. The idea would be to discuss what we discussed tonight, as much as people want to share, and at least get through the grading process, or give the people who ask for more time for grading, give them that opportunity. Turn in those grading sheets. The next meeting, I would anticipate a review of the grades, and ideally, in my opinion, I would hope that, and maybe there will be a clear couple of winners or a couple of folks, but ideally, our next meeting, I think we will have the grading summarized, and I think it would be my hope that we would at least cut down to finalists. And there's nothing that determines how many finalists we want. It can be 0, it can be 5, but my hope is that we would make that decision at our next meeting. Okay?
So at our next meeting, we're going to look at the summary numbers for all of them, have a conversation about how we arrived at those numbers, and from that conversation and the averages, then we're
Hopefully we'll
thinking
have
that
yes.
we might have a couple, there might be a break.
That would be the hope. That would be the hope. And there's nothing in the document in our RFP that says it has to be a certain number. It could be 4, it could be 2.
But perhaps there'll be an obvious numerical break.
That'd be nice.
Yeah.
Or we could discuss it a little more. A bad joke at 11:20 at night. Any additional questions or, Alderman Gutenkopf?
Well, I'd still like to talk a little bit procedurally, because one of the things that I struggled with as I was looking at how I might want to weight this are the financials provided by the developers, because clearly there were some huge differences in what they were projecting and what they were offering to the city. And I guess I'm looking for a little bit more direction. I see we got a handout, and perhaps we could go through this staff analysis tonight, and that might give me a little bit more of a sense of what do we think is realistic. So I guess I'm looking for some conversation about the spreadsheet we got tonight that includes a little bit more additional staff analysis. If somebody could walk us through that.
Alderman, Assistant City Manager Kopp, you want to bring us up to speed on the new spreadsheets we're looking at and what we're looking at, please?
Sure. What we did, on the first page, we asked for some more information. Some of the questions were asked by the aldermen. You see what's in red is the new information we got as far as units and unit sizes. If you go to the second page under financials, what we tried to do, and it's like Alderman Gutenkopf said, there was a wide variety of projections. So we looked at it, and we looked at a couple different areas. One was a retail space. And we just made some assumptions to try to make an apple-to-apple comparison. And we said a third of the space that's proposed will be a restaurant, and the sales tax 2.75%, and the other 67% will be retail space at 1.75%. And we just basically took the proposed square footage and multiplied it by 200 per square foot for retail and 400 per square foot from restaurant. Those are the projections we normally use. You saw in some of the proposals, they projected higher numbers, some as high as 500 or greater, and so we just said to make it even, and the projections we use when we do projections on retail and restaurant use, those are the projections we use, 200 and 400, just to keep it even. And we did the same thing for the property tax. If you saw the property tax numbers, they ranged anywhere from 2,400 a unit to 5,600 a unit. And so we looked at what we currently have in town as far as apartment buildings that are rental of a larger size, looked at what they were per unit, and because this is a newer development compared to other larger developments are quite old, we projected probably around 2,750, a unit, give or take 500 probably, but the same thing, they just take about a number of units and the projected property tax to try to make it an apples-to-apples comparison. And then we looked at just some of the public parking ownership and maintenance. Those were all different depending on which developer was, depending on who would own the spots, who would maintain them, and that's just the information that was given in the proposals as far as the parking, because it does add up significantly on some of the proposals. So we thought that was important that be put in there. But we did the best we could. We asked for more information from each developer to try to base the property tax on the net operating income, which is probably the way the assessor is going to do it. We had a difficult time doing that, so we said, what's the best way we can do it to make it a fair comparison? And looking at what's out there today, and this is up a little bit higher than what's out there today because it's be a new building as compared to the older buildings.
Okay, does that help, Alderman Gutenkopf?
It does, thank you.
Okay. Any additional comments or questions? Alderman Honquist.
I'll give a comment since I spend most of my life on the other side of RFPs. I kind of have a visceral reaction to them normally. I thought really two stood out for me, and I did learn a lot through the process, which is good. And I also like to point out that oftentimes it's respectful to get down to two or as few as you can, because the process does take a lot of time to go through these, takes a lot of time to go through these presentations. And oftentimes we think, well, maybe we'll keep an extra person in for this or an extra person in for that. And it's a lot of time and energy to go through this process, both for the vendors we're talking to as well as for city staff. So I came to a conclusion pretty quick on a couple that I feel pretty strongly about, and I'll go through the process and lay that out. But I just thought I'd share my thoughts on how I see these processes work out from my perspective, professionally as I have, and what my reaction was to what I saw, last week, so that we can move forward. Thanks.
Good. Any additional comments? Alderman Dunn.
Yeah, just a general observation on the 5 proposals. They were all very good, and I think we'd have a good project with any of these companies that we would align with. One observation I had was the size of the project that was proposed, and what I noticed, in my opinion, the Buckingham and the Jupiter proposals tend to be larger. I would say they're definitely bigger projects. Our previous discussion on the parking garage revolved around size. Those two appeared to be larger, where the banner, in my opinion, tended to be a smaller scale project that might be a consideration in a proper fit moving forward. I thought the other two were somewhere in between in terms of scale for those projects.
Thank you. Additional comments? Any additional input this evening? Well, I take that to mean that everyone has at least what they need to provide their grading sheets to city staff. Let me ask the council their direction. Tonight's the 16th. We do have a committee next Monday. We have an open Monday at the end of the month, the 5th Monday, the 30th, and or October 7th is a committee meeting. I think that we would continue to handle this as committee of the whole, yes? So, does anybody have an opinion on when they want to do this next? 23rd, 30th, or 7th? Alderman Mulliner.
I'd prefer to do it sooner. I will be out of town on the 7th, and I'd prefer to be here when this discussion occurs.
So the 23rd or the 30th. We're going to listen to Alderman Mulliner. Anybody? Alderman Healy.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Alderman Mulliner. The sooner the better. When we tend to prolong conversations or have periods between conversations, a lot of the same conversation occurs, and I'd rather keep this top of mind and move it forward, so next week, fine with me.
That's two sooner the betters. Alderman Gutenkopf.
Well, I agree we should meet next week, but I think we should leave the 30th open. As I recall, last time, we had several conversations about this. It's a pretty big decision, and I expect it to be should be a long, thoughtful discussion about what we're really looking for moving forward. So, while I think we should meet next week, I also think we should plan to meet on the 30th.
Okay, well, so noted. I think what I'm hearing from the council is let's meet next week, the 23rd. We will do committee of the whole after regular committee meetings. And also noted from Alderman Gutenkopf that we will probably need additional meetings, and we'll consider the 30th, and I think we'll make that final decision next week at the wrap-up of our meeting. Okay? I would ask for a motion to adjourn. Alderman Levin, with a second by Alderman York. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.